From United Airlines roughhousing its passengers to tech company Excite refusing to buy Google. These are the 10 worst business decisions ever made.
On the 9th of April 2017, a passenger was forcibly removed from a United Airlines flight at Chicago's O'Hare International Airport. 69-year-old Dr. David Dow was pulled from his seat and dragged down the aisle by security to make way for crew members to travel on an overbooked flight. Footage of the incident shows Dr. Dow in distress as blood can be seen streaming down his face. Dow, who was travelling with his wife, had initially volunteered to leave the plane, but when he learnt the next flight wasn't available until the following day, he declined, saying that he was a doctor and that he had to be back at work to treat patients. Shortly after the incident, the CEO of United Airlines, Oscar Munoz, issued a lackluster apology for what he described as having to re-accommodate customers. He later labelled Dr. Dow as disruptive and belligerent. The incident and the company's poor handling of the matter saw United Airlines stocks plummet, dropping $250 million of its market value. This appalling event further tarnishes United Airlines' image, who have consistently ranked among the lowest in customer satisfaction surveys for several years. On the 10th of January 2000, it was announced the dial-up internet service provider America Online would purchase Time Warner for $164 billion. The recent boom of internet-based companies had influenced the thought that AOL could help Time Warner to deliver their movies, music and magazines in a subscription-based model via the internet. However, the company began to lose market share to high-speed broadband providers. This, coupled with poor advertising strategies, led the company to report a staggering $99 billion loss in 2002. The results saw AOL stocks plummet, falling from $226 billion to around $20 billion. Current CEO of Time Warner, Jeff Bewkes, described the merger with AOL as the biggest mistake in corporate history. At its height in 2004, Blockbuster Video employed nearly 60,000 people in more than 8,000 stores worldwide. But within 6 years, the company was forced to file for bankruptcy protection, having experienced a catastrophic decline in revenue. The company's once mighty chain of stores was reduced to a meager 1,700. The reason? One word: Netflix. The subscription-based model of in-home entertainment provider Netflix appealed to consumers who were opting to stay at home rather than venturing to the video store to hire a movie. The dramatic decline of Blockbuster's video empire is made worse by the fact that they actually passed on a chance to partner with Netflix. In 2000, the founding members of Netflix met with the CEO of Blockbuster, John Antioco. According to the Netflix CFO, Barry McCarthy, when founding member Reed Hastings proposed to Antioco that Netflix take charge of running Blockbuster's brand online, they were nearly laughed out of the office. Today, Netflix is reported to have more than 98 million subscribers worldwide, with more than 50 million in the United States alone. On the 23rd of April 1985, Coca-Cola released a new version of their iconic soft drink. The decision to change their formula was made in an effort to keep up with the market rivals Pepsi, who had started to outsell Coke in supermarkets. New Coke was immediately met with anger from consumers, so much so that Coca-Cola was forced to hire psychiatrists to listen in on the thousands of abusive phone calls that began streaming in. The psychiatrists noted that many of the callers displayed distress similar to that of losing a loved one. Coca-Cola was forced to re-release the old formula, which, ironically, gave the company a sales spike big enough to recapture the market lead from Pepsi. Some analysts have speculated that New Coke was in fact an ingenious marketing strategy designed by Coca-Cola to re-establish the American people's love for their product. Most, however, believe the release of New Coke to be the worst marketing mistake of the 20th century. In 1971, the first Starbucks located in Seattle, Washington opened its doors to the public. Initially, the company only sold brewing equipment and coffee beans and didn't actually start making espresso coffee until the mid-80s. The company began to expand rapidly after the former owners sold the business to Howard Schultz. By 1989, Schultz already owned 46 stores across the US. Today, Starbucks has a value in excess of $50 billion, with over 23,500 stores in 61 countries across the globe. They are by far the largest coffee house franchise on earth. Despite the overwhelming success of Starbucks, a very embarrassing oversight occurred when their marketers were designing the signage of their Japanese delivery vans. The sliding doors opened to reveal the word "sucks" next to the company's logo. And of course, we could not mention the fleeting addition to Starbucks drink list, the Unicorn Frappuccino, which set social media on fire. The move has again brought their marketing into question, but many analysts are calling it a stroke of genius. However, research from the Stratford Health Department has noted that the drink contains 59 grams of sugar, which is over 2 times the recommended amount by the American Health Association. In the 1980s, Nintendo was the undisputed king of the video game industry, but over the years the company has made some very poor business decisions, which has seen them toppled from their throne. These decisions include making devices that are way too underpowered and waiting too long to release games for mobile devices. However, the worst business decision they ever made happened back in 1988, when Nintendo partnered with Sony to produce a CD-ROM add-on for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. The deal ultimately fell apart due to licensing disagreements, but Sony kept control of the SNES CD disc format. Sony's CD format was developed further and eventually became the PlayStation, the console that would knock Nintendo from their throne. Nintendo then went on to make a deal with Philips, Sony's rival, to produce a CD-based console. Again, the deal fell apart and nothing was made. To make matters worse for Nintendo, Philips was contractually allowed to use Nintendo's characters for games produced on the poorly received Philips CDI console. Games made included Hotel Mario along with 3 Zelda titles: Link, The Faces of Evil, Zelda, The Wand of Gamelon, and Zelda's Adventure. Ultimately, Nintendo came out of the sour deal far worse for wear. They didn't get a CD-ROM add-on for their SNES, lost rights to several of their popular gaming franchises, and inadvertently created their biggest rival, the Sony PlayStation. Nice one, Tendy. On the 1st of January 1962, record company Decca agreed to audition a relatively unknown band from Liverpool known as the Beatles. Rejection was nothing new to the group, who had already been overlooked by several labels including Columbia, Oriole and HMV. The band drove down to London the day before the audition but got lost along the way. After a 10-hour road trip, they finally arrived at 10 PM on New Year's Eve, just in time to see the drunks jumping in the Trafalgar Square fountain, John Lennon said. The following day, the band made up of John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison and Pete Best played 15 songs including 3 Lennon-McCartney originals. The session lasted just under an hour. After consideration, Decca Records decided against signing the Beatles, a decision that has been described as one of the worst in music history. The executives explained their decision by saying that they believed guitar music was on the way out, and that the Beatles have no future in show business. Today, the Beatles are widely considered one of the greatest musical acts of all time, with estimated sales of over 600 million records worldwide. The band still holds the record for the most #1 albums on the British charts, and has sold more singles in the UK than any other act. In 1980, the Mars Candy Company was approached by Universal Studios to feature M&Ms in a new movie, E.T. the Extraterrestrial. It was to be directed by Steven Spielberg, who had already received an Academy Award nomination for Best Director for Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Despite the movie's potential for success, Mars passed on the deal, which left the door wide open for another company to seize the opportunity. Hershey's Candy Company were offered the contract and accepted a deal to have their new product, Reese's Pieces, appear in the film. When the movie was released 2 years later, sales of Reese's Pieces skyrocketed by 300%. Furthermore, Hershey's had secured an advertisement for their candy in what was to become one of the most watched films of all time. E.T. went on to win 4 Academy Awards, and adjusted for inflation is still one of the top 10 highest grossing films ever made. When George Lucas approached 20th Century Fox with an idea to make a movie called The Star Wars, the executives thought the movie would almost certainly be a failure. But a persistent Lucas, fresh from directing American Graffiti, a film that earned 5 Academy Award nominations, managed to secure a deal to make the film. After earning $150,000 for directing American Graffiti, Lucas was now entitled to more than 3 times that amount to direct his new project. Despite his $500,000 director's fee, Lucas decided to approach the executives at Fox Studios with a deal that would become one of the most lucrative of all time. Lucas's deal involved him keeping his original director's salary of $150,000 in exchange for merchandising rights plus the rights to any sequels if they were to be made. The studio thought they were getting a bargain because no one believed the film would be successful, let alone do well enough to warrant a sequel. When Star Wars was released in 1977, it was an instant hit. It earned a staggering $220 million in the first 6 months at the US box offices alone. Adjusted for inflation, it's still the second highest grossing movie of all time. Despite the success of Star Wars, it was Lucas's deal to retain merchandising and sequel rights that saw him make his fortune. To date, Star Wars merchandise has made over $12 billion in revenue. On top of that, the next 5 films netted an additional $3.5 billion at the box office. Add to this sales of $4 billion worth of videos and DVDs, $3 billion worth of video games, and $2 billion worth of books. In 2012, Lucas sold the Star Wars franchise to Disney for a further $4 billion. Ultimately, Lucas's deal that originally saw him take a $350,000 pay cut to direct the film allowed him to amass a personal fortune of over $5 billion 35 years later, thus making Fox Studios' decision to give up merchandising and sequel rights very lame indeed. In 1999, George Bell, the CEO of internet portal Excite, met with Google's co-founder Larry Page to discuss the possible acquisition of a new search engine technology. Google, still known as Backrub, were operating out of Stanford University when Bell met with their team that only consisted of a handful of employees. Bell arranged to test both companies' search engines, but found the results were too similar at the time to say which one was better. Excite decided not to buy Google for the meager asking price of $750,000. Today, Google is worth more than $500 billion. It's difficult to know what may have happened if Google was acquired by Excite. Google's technology may have simply been shelved as Excite had already had their own search engine in use. Either way, it's easy to see why this is possibly the worst business decision ever made.
Well, that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. If you're new to the channel, then why not hit subscribe? If you want to watch more of our content, hit that top link there for a single episode. Click that bottom link there for a playlist. And that's it for me. I'll see you all next time. Phew!